Hi, everybody. My name is Toni and Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. Again, I have an author here today. I'm very excited. He's returning to the podcast. He was here to cover his last book. And now he's got something a little bit different out than the last time he was here. Tell me I belong. It's really a kind of a journey of self-discovery about, based on his own life. So help me welcome David Weill to the podcast. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to be back.
So this book was very different than your last book, right? Your last book, while obviously, I mean, you drew from your own experiences, but your last book was a fictionalized doctor. Uh, And this book is based upon your own past, your own family story. It's a memoir. How hard was this to write?
This one was hard to write. I did, a very deep dive, and it was also unlike the first two books I wrote, where I didn't have to do much research. I actually had to look into certain things that I didn't know, not only about my family's past, but about religion in general, about identity in general, about emotional inheritance. So this was actually a dive into my own past, certainly, but also a dive into some topics that I didn't know a whole lot about.
Now, where does the idea come for this memoir? I mean, is this something that was just eating at you and you looked into and then you realized, hey, I have this really compelling story to tell? Or, was this just something that you started with the idea for the book first and then started doing real research and realized how deep things went for you?
I think like a lot of authors, I kind of write about my obsessions, and this is something I have been focused on for a long time, ever since I was a little boy. This issue about what religion are you, what,
Mm.
how do you belong, identity. These are things that I write about in the book that started when I was very young and really stayed with me throughout my whole life. So I eventually knew I was going to write about this. And in fact, my editor wanted me to write about this first, before the other two books. But being stubborn as I am, I decided to write about something else, the first two books, mainly about my professional journey. But this is more about my personal journey.
It certainly is. I guess I find it like a deeply profound experience to take something so personal and then gather it together in a cohesive format, on paper. Um, what was that process like for you, that writing process like? I mean, you like affected, I mean, I don't know, maybe there's a difference between men and women in this regard, but I feel like I'm crying as I'm writing and I'm like, I'm just feeling like that's a way a woman would absorb that. But how was that for you? What was the process like for you?
Yeah, it's not for everybody. I'll say that. But I also found myself getting emotional about it. I didn't know my own story even as well as I thought I did, and in digging into it even more, I got emotional. Not so much about what happened to me, because I've had a pretty good life, but I think what happened to the people from whom I came. I think my family went through various traumas on my mother's side, civil rights movement on my father's side, and Nazi persecution. And I
Sure.
think in that regard, it was almost like I felt more for the people that I came from than for myself, if that makes sense. And I think that was the most emotional part, is trying to put myself in their shoes and try to experience what they experience.
Now you hired investigators, right, to go to Berlin for this to check on your grandfather's records um, and I guess uncover some of what his experience had been. You were not aware, obviously, beforehand.
No, there was a lot I didn't know, and in fact, I didn't even know how to find out what I didn't know. And so, I did hire some of the investigators that you mentioned, both in the U.S. and in Germany. In fact, went to Germany for almost a month and stayed there and really tried to figure out what was this 600-year family history that we had in Germany. And I certainly, the readers will be happy to know, I certainly didn't recount all 600 years. but it was important for me to understand the background because I don't, one thing I learned in all of this is it's very difficult to just say that any of us just dropped onto the face of the earth and that was it. I mean, we came from a line of people, and in fact, the line of people that I came from, especially on the German side, was pretty special. And I wanted to understand that. Even if all of it didn't end up in the book, I needed to understand it.
So a month in Germany. Wow, that's
Yeah.
that's a long time to be some had you been before?
Yeah, I had been.
Oh, you had.
Yeah, I had been. I don't, sadly, I don't speak the language. I'd like to. That would have been helpful because a lot of the documents were in German too. But I had somebody, actually two somebodies that were helping me translate and get around and see parts of Germany I've never seen before. Like many people, I've been to the big cities.
Yeah.
But my family was from this little southwest corner of Germany that was more village-like. And if you go to this little part of Germany, my last name is all over the place. It's on every billboard, storefront, gravesite, you name it. There was a lot of us there, and there's not a lot of us anymore anywhere, but there was a lot of us there then.
And so, what's it like when you're uncovering his story? I mean, to hear this for the first time, what he experienced, he was in a concentration camp, and to learn about it. I mean, I would think at that point, you're having a hard time differentiating, like, oh, I'm putting this together for a book, as opposed to now you're looking at it and saying, wow, like this is my lineage, right? This is where I come from. This actually happened, and what was his experience like, right? Empathetically, it had to be hard.
Yeah, but it reminded me a lot of my first book where I was writing about my professional career and the ups and downs of doing transplant work and the patients that I experienced and what I learned from it. It's very difficult, I think, for me at least, in real time to understand really what's going on with me. And in fact, I didn't really want to separate the personal experience from the book writing experience because for me, they're the same. They're exactly
Uh-huh.
the same.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, I kind of wanted to kind of be a narrator, if I could be.
So
Uh,
this was a collaborative experience for you. It's like you
yeah,
took the reader on the journey.
definitely. And the book hopefully will be interesting, but one interesting part of it is that it moves geographic locations quite a bit. My story happened in a lot of different places, Germany being one of them, but it's New Orleans where I grew up. It's Palo Alto, California, where I spent most of my professional career. It's New York, where my grandparents and father landed when he came to this country. It's Miami, where they settled. It's Selma, Alabama, where my mother grew up. And I move around all of these places. And that was fun for me. And I hope it's fun for the reader because I like books that actually move locations. I think it's fun.
So, with the point that because you converted to Catholicism,
I did.
and was that just something that independent, like of your own? I mean, because you're obviously there's really no Catholics in your background,
No, there
right?
there weren't. There weren't. My my experience without any religion growing up, happened in a variety of ways. But one of the ways was, I always said my house of worship was at the hospital because that's where I went every Sunday, and that's where I found the most spiritual part of me. But while I was doing that, my wife and my two kids were going to Catholic church, and it dawned on me the disconnect, that in a way my family was experiencing one thing, I was experiencing another. And I thought when it was time for me to embrace formal religion, that the one that made most sense to me was to become part of the religion that my family was. And that worked for me well, I thought, until there was a couple twists that changed that I won't give away a spoiler alert in the book, but I had some things happen to me.
Yeah. Well. I mean, I think it's always hard to write a memoir, um, especially I think you need to be objective, right? To write write your own memoir, because otherwise you run the risk of it looking and reading very much like,
Self-serving kind of, yeah,
yeah, a self-serving story
yeah,
that nobody wants to believe. So I think
yeah,
you've got to do a warts and all, or you've got to. I think you've got to be honest, right, to write it,
yeah.
and I think that's hard,
It
right,
is.
for a lot of people. So I give you credit. It's genuinely hard to be objective in your own story.
It
Uh,
is. I mean, I experienced this when I wrote Exhale, which was my first book about my experience in running Stanford's transplant program, where
it's
I
the one
just,
with the lungs, right? The lung
yeah,
book.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Lungs are us, as I like to say.
Yeah.
I, in that book, because I wanted to show the emotional toll that doing the kind of work I did took on me and the team that I ran, I was actually pretty transparent that I didn't always act in a way that I'm proud of. And in fact, I described those moments where I was less than my best self in the hospital. And I've had, people that I've worked with say, you weren't as bad as that. But I wanted to be sure, the last thing I want to do is write a book that says, I did everything perfectly and I'm great and,
Yeah.
um, because I don't think not only don't people want to read that, it's not the case.
Yeah, but I think that's not being objective, certainly about oneself, is not that easy.
No,
Um, I think we're all sort of the hero in our own story, right?
right. That's right.
Otherwise, we wouldn't. Because even the villain in his mind is, is the hero, and even the villain sees their own story as the justified story. So I think it's not that easy for anybody to separate that. So I applaud you um, for doing that, right? You really take an intellectual look at your life and tell that story with truth, and that's hard. I applaud
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think so. It's not a book I could have written when I was younger. Let's put it this way. I think the only benefit that I can see of getting older is that you probably care somewhat less about what other people think of you.
Agreed.
And I'm like everybody else. I want people to like me. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, if I expose flaws, I don't feel like that's such a bad thing. Especially in today's world where, social media, I think, has not helped in this regard where everybody looks perfect, and we know that's not true, right? But there's a lot of motivation in our culture to look perfect, and I want to cut against that if I can.
Well, I think that's hard even on kids growing up,
Yeah.
right? Because I do think that's true. I think that unfortunately the presentation of perfection, right, also deeply affects kids as they're, coming into especially those awkward years and they don't see themselves as perfection. And that's a really unhealthy message to put out there.
I think that's right.
What I was curious too about is when you're learning all about your Jewish heritage, when you're like knee deep in Germany and finding this out, did you ever have the impulse to convert to Judaism?
I
Like,
yeah, it's a good question. And I think what I have an impulse to do mostly is not so much, go back and forth between religions um, or kind of make some public pronouncement about it. What I really am interested in doing is saying to myself, what's my identity? From whom did I come? And how do I identify now? And I am Jewish, and I have been all along. My mother converted to Judaism without my knowing about it, and that was kind of part of the spoiler alert in the book. And that means by Jewish law, I'm Jewish. She was Baptist growing up, but that doesn't make any difference. So the fact that I can just say I can call myself whatever religion I want, but really I am Jewish, because of that, and embrace all of these people that came before me that had such a strong, many of whom were rabbis, by the way, going back hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And to carry that heritage around with me is something that wasn't lost on me. I understand it now a lot better. And it was particularly funny a couple of years ago, like a lot of people, I did one of those DNA tests just for whatever reason.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to see if there was any stray Wiles out there that I could contact when I was researching for the book. And I found that I was 95% Northern European Jewish heritage, and I was like, okay, there you go. This test knows, even if I'm a little unclear about it. So it was, it was a really good experience. I mean, I'm glad. And yet, when you're doing a book for a few years, it's nice to be interested in the subject matter, a long few years otherwise.
Yeah. So what has been like the reaction for your family reading the book?
Yeah. Um, some of it is surprise that I took this on to begin with. And some of it is just like everybody's story, even the people you live with, they don't know everything about you. And I revealed as much as I could. But what I think will be interesting, and I don't know when this podcast drops, but the book's coming out December 9th, and what'll be interesting to see when a larger number of people read it. Right now, just a handful of people have read it, and it'll be interesting when there's a larger group because I'll just like my other books, I'll get feedback. People aren't shy about that, at least people I know.
Yeah, I mean, ordinarily I read the books before the podcast, and I don't know where it's fell through the cracks. I wound up not getting to read your book. I'm a little, I'm anxious, you know what I mean? Because I really wanted to. Just reading the subject matter, I thought this is going to be a really cool book. So I'm actually looking forward to it.
I appreciate that. I hope so. I mean, one thing that is always a concern when you write about yourself is that, people that don't know you will say, well, who cares? But I
Oh
think
no, this is the universe. This is a universal
yeah,
story.
that's what I was getting at. I do think as I've worked on this project, I thought I was the only one struggling with this subject matter, but as it turns out, I'm not the only one. And
Not even close.
that's what I'm hoping, that the book has broader appeal. So,
Well, first of all, I think religion is, a really hard topic to take on to begin with, right? I think some people at least are very ingrained in their religion. So I think to take on anything in a more open-minded way, like there are other religions, and especially having converted to Catholicism, I think I don't want to say chose options, you know what I mean? But you're looking at somebody who is, like you said, this was my journey. I am a Jewish person, but I've converted to practicing something else now. I think that experience is not unique. Many people convert from one religion to another uh, because whatever they feel called to that religion, or that religion speaks to them more than another. There are people who've gone their whole life with no religion, right, in houses which did not teach or encourage religious beliefs, and they come to it on their own as adults, whether it be a single event in their life that leads them there, or just that pressing pecking, in their head, that this that keeps drawing them in a certain direction. Um, so I think that's like a journey unto itself, like figuring out, what do I believe, whether it was taught to you in your house or not, right? To become an adult and figure out, do I believe, what the religion I am, and if not, am I going to make changes? I think that's a really global kind of a journey, certainly not unique to you. And I think that a lot of people would learn from that to see one person's journey. I also really like the concept of going, you travel someplace to see what your, ancestors experienced, to absorb it in a more real time sort of a reality check way. I mean, you can tell me something that happened to my ancestors in Italy, but I imagine it's very different if I actually was standing in Italy in the area and the
Yeah.
place and the, right, to absorb it in that way. I think that it feels so incredibly real, is different. And I love that that is part of your book and your story, because I think that changes a person in a way nothing else could.
I think you're right. I was surprised at how impactful it was to first read about this little town in Germany where 600 years of Weil's hailed from, called Kippenheim. And it's a village. I mean, it's truly a village. It's small. And I was surprised as I read about it, just like you suggested. I was sort of reading along and saying, yeah, 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 I got it, you know. And then toward the end of my research and actually the writing of the book, I called my editor in my publishing house and said, we're gonna have to wait a little bit. I'm gonna go there actually, and I'm gonna write a section of the book about being there. And they were like, how long will that take? And it was really important for me to do that. I underestimated how valuable that was,
Oh
because it's a
yeah.
visceral thing. You want to smell the air, you know, that they smelled, and walking through the cemeteries and every other, you know, tombstone had Weil on it, and you know, and that kind of thing. You really get a sense that the people that you're reading about just don't exist on a page somewhere. You know, they existed in this little town, and it was hundreds of years of them. You know, so I'm glad I went. It was, you know, like I said, toward the end of the process, and I guess I could have just wrapped it up, and you know, but I'm really glad I went.
Oh, yeah. I think that that probably is one of the most essential parts of the story, right? And maybe it was unplanned, right? But the reality is, it's one thing to tell your story, and I think it's a compelling universal story. People deal with stuff all the time, is trying to figure out who you are, what you want in life, or going through anything that requires change or thought or analysis is not easy,
No,
right? So,
no. And I mean, you know, people you know, like I've talked about the book, I probably will talk about it a lot more, and everybody's going to say, what's the book about? And, um, you know, my first answer was, well, it's about religious identity. But, you know, when I thought about it some more, it's really about identity, period. Because the whole thing started with kind of me in the hospital, you know, trying to sort of say, I saw a lot of mystical, mysterious, spiritual things in the hospital doing transplant work, people living and dying for no, you know, no apparent reason. And when you look in the mirror every morning, all of us have to kind of summarize ourselves. At least I feel like I do. You know, father, um, transplant doctor, Catholic, you know, Jewish, whatever. You kind of, all of us like a neat little picture to summarize ourselves. And for many, many years, most of my life, I'm kind of sad to admit, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a transplant doctor because that was my most important identification. That's changed, but for most of my life, that was what it was.
yeah. Yeah, like that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think that is a universal story, because making change of any kind, right, I think is difficult. Like I said, anything that involves some analytical work, it's hard to put that in, and it's hard to figure something out that's going to change you, right? So I think that's a universal story, especially from youth to adulthood, right? And as we continue to grow, being open to, analyzing our life, our story, and changing us, it all becomes part of who we are. And I think that taking it to that next level, that journey, to Germany, wow. I mean, I think it's incredible. There's sort of that vibe in the air, right? Anytime you go see anything, And it could be the college your one of your parents attended. Like it be anything that you've heard about for a long time, a place where maybe your relative grew up, even if it's not traveling to another current country. But when you go and experience anything like that, you feel that. You feel that in the air. You could almost see it through their eyes in those moments. And I think that's pretty amazing. And I think that's got to change you.
It does, and I think it was also interesting. Like I opened the book, 1972, New Orleans. I'm putting myself in my little boy house, the house I grew up with. My father and I are watching the Munich Olympics in 1972, and so the geography was one thing, but you're also trying to put yourself in the mindset of a scared 8-year-old boy when they killed all the Israeli athletes, you know.
Yeah.
My father, you know, had seen this movie before, and sitting there watching it with him is how I kind of opened the book because I'm really thinking to myself, you know, I didn't really know what was going on when I was 8, but I knew something was going on. Like it wasn't just something on TV. Like my father was experiencing something, you know, because he had left the country not that long prior. I mean, when you think
Yeah.
about it, it wasn't that long ago from
Yeah.
1972 to he left in 1939. Not that long, you know. So,
Well, I mean, good luck with the book. I mean,
thank you.
I think it's on sale pretty much anywhere you
It
can buy books.
Yeah, it's going to be everywhere. One easy spot to find it if you go to my website, which is ingeniously named davidweill.com. You can find links to all the usual places that sell books. Support your independent bookseller if you can, but
I agree.
but the books are going to be everywhere. So
Well, I mean, thank you for coming to talk to me. I know we're running out of time. I always enjoy you're a thinker. I like the deep thinkers who write. So keep coming back and talk to me about books as you write them.
I don't know if I was blessed with that or burdened with that, but that's what I have. So anyway,
Right? It is your burden. Now
yeah.
you're forced and you have the bug, you have the writing bug, right? In you now. So I think you spent so many years cr in a saving people, certainly, first and foremost, but creating, right? I mean, you're creating a way for somebody to live through a unique procedure that you master how to do, and you actually do. You're creating another life for somebody. You know, you're creating a path forward despite the obstacle of without it, maybe they would have no more life left. So I do think you spent your initial part of your life creating through medicine, right? And now creating through writing, also very valuable. I mean, our brains are just as important, and how we stimulate them through reading, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I think is an important thing too. So
Well, I appreciate that. It's been a great journey. I feel lucky to be able to put these words down. So thank you.
thank you for being here. I hope you come back again, and I will close the podcast. Thank you for watching or listening.